Hey guys, tonight we're going to tiptoe across velvet carpets, drown in bathtubs the size of swimming pools, and eat our weight in lobster thermidor, all without ever leaving bed. That's right, we're diving headfirst into the lavish, slightly unhinged, and sometimes very sticky world of America's richest people just before the Great Depression. Imagine Downton Abbey, but everyone is addicted to cigars, thinks prohibition laws are just a suggestion. And gets offended if their dog's fur isn't brushed by a Harvard grad. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, flip on a fan, and wrap yourself in a blanket that costs less than the price of a 1920s toothpick collection. Get comfortable. Settle in. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to be the richest person in America before it all went sideways? Did you have to wear a top hat in the bath? Was it possible to fire a servant for folding your napkin incorrectly? Did these people ever eat regular food? Or did they just inject foie gras straight into their veins? What was the most expensive thing you could buy in 1928? And was it possible to buy happiness? Or just another yacht you couldn't remember the name of? Could you really call yourself old money if your entire fortune was based on railroads, coal, or a monopoly on breakfast cereal? And most importantly, would any of these people last 5 minutes in a modern Costco? Congratulations, you've just woken up at 1927, at the dizzying top of the American food chain. The jazz is hot, the stock market is hotter, and nobody has ever heard of the word recession. Welcome to the land of Gatsby, Astor, Rockefeller, and maybe a few oil barons who smell faintly of whale blubber. Good luck. It's sunrise in your 40-bedroom mansion, and the first thing you feel isn't joy or existential dread. It's a bedsheet with a higher thread count than your IQ. The windows are opened for you by a servant whose only job is to gently disturb the air. And somewhere in the hall, a marble statue judges you for not sleeping with a nightcap. You try to stretch, but you're immediately swaddled by about 7 layers of Egyptian cotton, a monogrammed coverlet, and what may or may not be a pelt from the world's least motivated mink. Your bedroom is so large that echoes have their own schedules. And if you look closely, you might spot last night's pianist still wandering around, trying to find the exit. Before your feet even touch the rug, woven by blind nuns according to family legend, your valet materializes at your bedside like a silent butler-shaped cloud. He carries a tray of exactly 3 things: a glass of fresh orange juice, a menu for breakfast, and today's stock prices. Spoiler, everything is up. Life is good when the world's economy is an endless buffet. Meanwhile, sunlight trickles in through 15-foot windows draped in imported silk, filtered gently by a maid who specializes in morning luminosity optimization. Yes, that's a real job here. Your room smells faintly of lavender, lemon oil, and generational wealth. If you're lucky, there's even a faint aroma of toast, drifting through the corridors like a friendly reminder that someone, somewhere, is making sure you never have to burn your own bread. Let's talk about your pajamas. They're not just pajamas. They're a statement. Hand-tailored, monogrammed, and possibly worth more than a Model T. The only thing more luxurious is the moment you slide your feet into slippers that have never touched a non-carpeted surface. The temperature is just right. It's always just right. If the thermostat dips even a fraction, a highly trained heat adjustment specialist is on standby to correct the oversight and personally apologize for your temporary discomfort. Imagine living in a world where drafts are simply a myth and woolen socks are something you hear about in stories told by less fortunate people. Your morning doesn't actually begin until the first cup of coffee, brewed from beans that were, presumably, serenaded by a string quartet at harvest. The silver tray is so polished you could check your hair, but why bother? That's what the hairbrusher is for. He's waiting discreetly by the door with a comb and a positive affirmation, just in case you start to worry about your part. While you sip your coffee, your valet reads you a handwritten summary of the newspapers, leaving out any articles that might cause stress, like market fluctuations or scandalous elopement in Rhode Island. The goal is to start your day in a state of serene, oblivious bliss. As you finally rise, someone has already chosen your clothes. There's a logic to it, something to do with the color of the sky, the shade of your mood, and the seasonal rotation of your 12 identical dressing gowns. Your shoes are polished to a mirror sheen and placed at a mathematically precise angle beside your bed. If you happen to grab the wrong pair, a polite cough from the wardrobe attendant will nudge you back to the path of least resistance and most social approval. By now, the hallway outside your room has sprung to life. Flowers have been refreshed. Carpets have been vacuumed, with a contraption so loud it could summon the National Guard. And breakfast is waiting in whichever room you decide to bless with your presence. A parade of staff stands ready. Someone to hold your robe, someone to carry your newspaper, and, if you're feeling especially aristocratic, someone to quietly agree that yes, you do look especially well rested today. As you sweep into the world, wrapped in silk and comfort and gentle, unconditional praise, remember, for America's richest, the hardest part of the tenure, morning is deciding which luxury to enjoy first. And the real struggle? Making it all look effortless, as if you woke up this way, radiant, unbothered, and absolutely convinced that a bad hair day is just a rumor started by people who can't afford 2 butlers. Welcome to the morning routine. Try not to spill your orange juice. Someone would have to write a report. Before you even lift a finger, half a dozen people are already hard at work to make sure you never, ever have to. There's a maid for your clothes, a cook for your dog, and a chauffeur who sighs gently every time you try to drive yourself. Being rich is mostly about finding new ways to avoid touching doorknobs. Let's start with the butler, because in a world where your mansion has more rooms than the periodic table has elements, someone has to be in charge of your existential logistics. The butler is a force of nature, appearing silently at your elbow with the day's correspondence, your monogrammed handkerchief, and discreet warning that your mother-in-law is lurking in the drawing room. He is the gatekeeper to your sanity, the enforcer of decorum, and the only person who can stop a spontaneous duel between the cook and the gardener. Again, the maid situation is robust. There are maids for dusting, maids for ironing, and maids for rearranging the pillows to look less tragic. You might never see them, but you will know if they're on strike, because your towel will be folded in a way that makes you question your worth as a person. The laundry staff alone could run a small textile factory, and rumor has it the house's hot water heater fears them. Occasionally, you'll spot a blur of starched white uniform disappearing around a corner, leaving behind the faint scent of lemon polish and silent judgment. Then there's the cook, a culinary wizard who has opinions, loud opinions, about the proper way to scramble an egg. You don't cook, obviously. Your only job in the kitchen is to occasionally point at something in the pantry and say, "More of that, please." The rest is handled by a team of professionals who treat your dietary whims as if they are messages from the oracle at Delphi. If your poodle prefers her veal lightly poached and fanned on bone china, so be it. If you want toast cut into triangles and only served on Tuesdays, consider it done. Meanwhile, your own breakfast is curated, plated, and delivered by someone who has never once let your eggs touch your bacon. This is the luxury you were promised. Outside, the chauffeur is polishing your fleet of cars, or more likely, debating with another chauffeur about the philosophical implications of parallel parking a Pierce Arrow. The car is always ready, the tires are always gleaming, and should you suggest you'd like to drive yourself, your chauffeur will fix you with a look so tragic you'll feel like you've personally insulted his ancestors. Driving is for other people, people with nowhere to be and nothing to lose. You, on the other hand, are chauffeured, even if it's just to the other end of the driveway. Somewhere in the background, gardeners and groundskeepers toil away. They are the unsung heroes of the estate, waging a never-ending battle against invasive species, falling leaves, and the vague suspicion that the neighbor's peacock is plotting something. The lawn is so perfectly manicured that rumors spread if a blade of grass is out of line. You could, in theory, wander out and appreciate the rose garden, but that's risky. You might wrinkle your trousers, and besides, the head gardener would have to approve your route first. Let's not forget the specialists, the people who exist solely for the weird emergencies that only the ultra-wealthy experience. The piano tuner who arrives monthly, even though nobody actually plays. The fireplace consultant, whose entire job is to decide which logs burn with the most dignified aroma. The person who dusts the chandeliers and is sworn to secrecy about what they find up there. Having staff is less about delegation and more about performance art. The house runs on an invisible clockwork of effort you'll never notice unless something goes terribly wrong, like your monogrammed slippers being delivered to the wrong wing. All you have to do is float serenely from room to room, nodding graciously, pretending you've never even heard of a mop. In the end, being rich in pre-depression, America means never needing to do anything yourself, except, perhaps, the exhausting work of remembering everyone's names. And if you forget, that's what the butler is for. Forget oatmeal. Your breakfast is a parade. Eggs from a chicken who gets daily massages, toast from bread made by an angry Frenchman, and coffee that costs more per ounce than the average worker's weekly wage. If it's not smothered in cream or accompanied by champagne, you send it back. You wake up hungry, but not the sort of hungry that's solved by cold cereal or yesterday's toast. This is the appetite of someone who hasn't had to cook their own food since the McKinley administration. Breakfast, for you, isn't a meal. It's a daily proof that you're winning at capitalism. Downstairs in the breakfast room, never the kitchen, heavens no. You're greeted by a table that's longer than most marriages, groaning under the weight of food that took an entire staff half the night to assemble. The silver domes are lifted, and the spectacle begins. Omelettes filled with lobster and flecks of gold leaf, as if your taste buds are in desperate need of bling. Bacon is brought in from a farm with a name you can't pronounce, hand-selected by someone with a monocle. You don't eat just any fruit. Your grapefruit comes sliced and pre-sprinkled with imported sugar, the kind that gets smuggled into the country disguised as fine jewelry. Berries in cut glass bowls glisten in the sun, their only job to remind you that scurvy is for the poor. And what's that? The day's light option. Smoked salmon flown in from somewhere so remote that even the pilot hasn't heard of it. It's arranged on porcelain so delicate you're afraid to breathe too hard. Garnished with fresh herbs grown in a greenhouse solely for your breakfast pleasure. You might have a few slivers of cheese, imported, aged, and labeled in French just to make sure everyone feels underdressed. Is this excessive? Yes. Is it breakfast? Also, yes. Breads and pastries arrive on their own separate cart, because apparently gluten needs its own mode of transportation. Croissants so buttery they could double as skincare, danishes that stare at you with judgment, and toast, never just bread, but toast, crisped to within an inch of its life by a man who spent a decade perfecting his craft and now resents it deeply. There's also always at least one item no one eats. Perhaps a whole roast quail or a pyramid of honeyed figs. Because nothing says wealth like performing a minor food sacrifice each morning. Your drink options are a masterclass in overkill. Coffee, yes, but not the sort that comes from a can. This is single origin, hand ground, and brewed by someone who refers to themselves as a caffeine sommelier. Served in bone china, so delicate you need 2 hands to hold it and 3 to pay the insurance. Prefer tea? The tea caddy contains blends you've never heard of, with names like Imperial Sunrise and Regret of the Maharaja. And of course, there's always the option of fresh juice. Fresh meaning a servant started squeezing oranges 3 towns over at 5 a.m. And if it's the weekend or you're simply in a good mood, there's champagne. Because nothing says good morning like drinking something that could fund a semester at Yale before 9 a.m. As you make your choices, a discreetly hovering staff member will jot down any favorites, ensuring they magically reappear every day until you decide you're tired of perfection. Meanwhile, you're free to peruse the morning paper, hand-pressed, ironed, and delivered without a single inconvenient wrinkle, or simply sit back and enjoy the view from your window, which conveniently overlooks absolutely none of your own responsibilities. Breakfast, in this world, isn't just about nutrition. It's an edible status update, a way to remind yourself, and any house guests unlucky enough to have joined you, that you live in a universe with its own rules. Calories don't count, bacon comes in varieties, and someone else will absolutely handle the crumbs. By the time you finish, you're fortified for a day of being rich. Maybe you'll write a letter to your broker. Maybe you'll decide which yacht to use this afternoon. Or maybe you'll just go back to bed and dream of a world where breakfast actually requires effort. But not today. Today, the only thing you're expected to lift is your spoon. And, if you're feeling generous, a single eyebrow at the toast. Getting dressed is a team sport. Corsets, collars, cufflinks, and silk everything. Putting on clothes is an Olympic event. Your wardrobe is a museum. Your shoes are shined by specialists. And nothing says old money like wearing a tie so tight you can't actually breathe. The process starts before you're even fully awake. Somewhere in the depths of your mansion, a valet is already prepping today's outfit narrative. A collection of garments designed not just to cover your body, but to subtly broadcast your mood, your station in life, and your lingering childhood trauma about being under-accessorized. You don't just wear clothes. You emerge from layers of fabric like a particularly stylish butterfly, with 3 people pulling the cocoon. First, the underlayers, silk undergarments that could double as investment portfolios, followed by socks so soft you briefly question whether it's ethical to step on them. Next comes the shirt, a stiff-collared thing that can stand up on its own and, with enough starch, probably file its own taxes. The butler and valet orchestrate the collar insertion, a 2-person operation involving patience, precision, and, occasionally, minor swearing in French. For gentlemen, there's a vest and jacket, both tailored within an inch of their lives, with lapels so sharp you could slice breakfast sausage on them. Cufflinks are selected with the gravity of a diplomatic summit. Do you want understated onyx or diamond encrusted? The answer depends entirely on whether you're brunching with your lawyer or the King of Belgium. Your tie is a masterpiece. A silken python that wraps around your neck and whispers, "You don't need to breathe." Breathing is for people who shop at department stores. For ladies, the stakes are even higher. There's the corset, a marvel of 1920s engineering, designed to sculpt your figure and eliminate any chance of reaching the 3rd course at dinner without sighing loudly. Underneath, layers of slips, petticoats, and, if the season is right, mysterious lace items whose sole purpose seems to be confusing future historians. The dress itself is selected from a rainbow of fabrics, all with French names and none with washing instructions. Jewelry, hats, gloves, and a purse the size of a grapefruit round out the ensemble. It's possible to spend a small country's GDP on a single outfit and still fret that your pearls are last season. The shoes. Oh, the shoes. They're kept in their own closet, organized by color, material, and perceived emotional energy. Before you even think about slipping them on, a specialist polishes, buffs, and lines them with fresh tissue. Heaven forbid you wear last week's Oxfords on a Wednesday, or show up at tea in boots meant for the stables. Getting this wrong could mean social exile, or worse, subtle, devastating comments from Aunt Mildred. As you finally stand, a full entourage assembles to review your look. Your valet smooths invisible wrinkles. The maid checks for stray threads. A junior footman ensures your pocket square's angle is mathematically precise. And the butler offers a last, dignified nod of approval. You catch a glimpse of yourself in one of several gilded mirrors, looking less like a person and more like a walking portrait commissioned by someone who owns half of Delaware. The goal isn't comfort. Comfort is for people who have to do things. The goal is effortless perfection. The sort of style that says, I woke up like this. And also, I own a small diamond mine. Even the act of putting on gloves is a ritual. Stretch, snap, adjust, and hope you don't accidentally wave at the mailman. Stepping into the corridor, your clothes whisper, rustle, and announce you long before you open your mouth. Every button, every seam is both a privilege and a burden. Today, you are armored in silk and reputation, ready to face the world, or at least brunch, with all the nonchalance of someone who's never known the struggle of tangled drawstrings. As you glide toward the breakfast room, remember, the rich didn't just get dressed. They declared war on mediocrity, one cufflink at a time. And if your tie is a little tight, that's just a reminder that elegance, like wealth, sometimes takes your breath away. In 1920s, mansions' bathtubs were so big you needed a lifeguard. You bathe in milk, rose petals, or occasionally champagne, just to prove a point. If you have to fetch your own towel, you might as well declare bankruptcy. Welcome to the richest person's most sacred space, the bathroom. Or, as it's referred to on your estate, the hydrotherapy wing. It occupies the entire second floor of the east wing and is larger than the average worker's house. At its center is the tub, though calling it a tub feels disrespectful. This thing is a marble-lined lagoon, complete with steps, gold fixtures, and a footman whose only job is to ensure the water temperature remains precisely lukewarm with a whisper of jasmine. You do not operate the faucets yourself. That's what the bath engineer is for. Your morning soak is a delicate ritual. First, the bath is drawn, not filled, never filled. Drawn sounds fancier, and also implies someone else did all the work. The water must be imported spring water, filtered through crushed diamonds, allegedly for clarity, and blessed by a priest, or at least someone with a good moustache and vague European credentials. Rose petals are scattered, hand-torn, never whole, and the air smells faintly of lavender, bergamot, and generational detachment. You disrobe with the help of your valet, who pretends not to notice your refusal to remove jewelry before entering the bath. It's fine. You can always buy new emerald cufflinks if they dissolve. You descend into the water like a visiting deity, slowly, dramatically, and with a slight wince because, despite the care, it's still somehow just a little too hot. The bath itself is silent, except for the gentle trickle of soap, a nearby fountain, and the occasional sigh from your bath attendant, who is there in case you need someone to refill your champagne flute or rescue you if your loofah escapes. You don't use regular soap. That's for peasants and pirates. Instead, You are lathered with imported creams containing ingredients no one can pronounce, harvested by monks, possibly during a solar eclipse. The bubbles are excessive, as they should be. Anything less would be indecent. Let's pause for a moment and talk towels. These are not the sad, slightly damp rectangles you forgot to replace in your own bathroom. These towels are thick enough to stop bullets and soft enough to make clouds feel insecure. They're pre-warmed, monogrammed, and scented with something vaguely aristocratic, like sandalwood and subtle judgment. You do not dry yourself. That's what the towel valet is for. A man who's seen too much and says too little. After your bath, you're wrapped in a robe so plush it could double as diplomatic attire. The robe is carried in on a silk pillow by a junior housemaid who curtsies before presenting it. You're then escorted to the powdering station, a little marble alcove with mirrors on every side, so you can reflect on how truly radiant and slightly ridiculous you now look. Here, a light dusting of talcum powder is applied with the same reverence normally reserved for coronations and opera divas. Of course, this entire process has taken the better part of an hour, and you're only 40% ready to face the day. But you feel clean, cleaner than clean. You feel sanctified, like you could walk into a bank and get handed a loan purely based on your current scent. This is the luxury of bathing before the Great Depression. Water so warm it forgives your sins, bubbles so abundant they threaten to form a union, and towels so thick they could support your emotional baggage. It's not hygiene, it's performance art. Because when you're unimaginably wealthy in 1927, cleanliness isn't next to godliness. It's above it, preferably in a clawfoot tub the size of a koi pond. Rich people's pets didn't just get treats, they got staff. Whether it's a poodle with its own chef, or a parrot with a vocabulary bigger than your social circle, animal care is less about affection and more about making other rich people jealous. You wake up to the distant sound of silver food bowls being polished and a soft harp melody drifting from the conservatory where your cat takes her morning sunbath. No, she's not just lounging. She's receiving light therapy from a staff member trained in both feline temperament and French impressionism. Her day begins before yours, and frankly, she deserves it. She's descended from royalty, or so says the silk-bound certificate signed by an ambiguously titled Austrian count. Let's start with the dog. His name is likely something elaborate and over-consonanted, like Admiral Whisford IV. He has his own wing of the estate, decorated in tasteful tartan and smelling faintly of beef consommé and cedarwood. His daily routine includes a warm towel massage, custom meals prepared by a dog chef, not a chef who cooks for dogs, but a chef who specializes exclusively in haute canine cuisine, and a gentle brushing by a full-time groomer who whispers affirmations during de-shedding. The phrase, "he eats better than most people," is not hyperbole here, it's a documented fact. Feeding time is ceremonial. A footman presents the dog's breakfast on a silver tray, often consisting of locally sourced meats, hand-rolled grains, and a light drizzle of bone broth harvested from cows who attended finishing school. Should the meal fail to impress, the chef will personally apologize to the dog and adjust the seasoning. There is a staff memo about this. You signed it. Meanwhile, the cat, Countess Lady Musington, watches from her chaise lounge with an expression that suggests both quiet judgment, high expectations. Her meals are simple: organic fish poached in mineral water, served in crystal. Her litter box is changed by a member of the housekeeping staff trained in delicate task discretion, and she receives aromatherapy twice weekly. Not for her stress, she has none, but for yours. Her perfume? A subtle blend of lavender and the scent of a Parisian bookshop. And then, there are the exotic pets. You might have a parrot named Commodore Pesto, who speaks 5 languages and gossips better than your aunt at Christmas, or a monkey who wears a little velvet waistcoat and has been taught to give disapproving glances to dinner guests. These animals are not pets. They are characters in the daily soap opera that is your life. And each one, of course, has their own dedicated handler. Someone who has attended animal etiquette school and can interpret a cocked eyebrow from a Persian cat like it's Morse code. Exercise is handled with the same over-the-top flair. The dog has a personal trainer. The cat has a playroom the size of a tennis court. Birds have open-air enclosures equipped with climbing vines, fountains, and possibly a string quartet during high tea. And if your tortoise feels sluggish, there's a spa. You're not sure what they do for him, but he always comes back glowing. Veterinary care is provided in-house, naturally. A personal vet is on call 24/7 and arrives in a crisp uniform with an embroidered stethoscope and a horse-drawn carriage, even if it's just for a chipped nail. And should the unthinkable happen, a pet illness, a sore paw, a bad dream, there's a trained animal therapist ready to talk them through it, with soft lighting and chamomile tea. To love a pet in the 1920s elite class is to enter into a high-stakes game of one-upmanship. It's not enough for your terrier to be cute. He must be better dressed than your neighbor's toddler. And if someone else's bird recites poetry, yours must compose it. Because, in the land of absurd wealth, how you treat your animals says everything about who you are, and nothing says power like a schnauzer in a tailored tuxedo being spoon-fed filet mignon while a full-time butler wipes his mouth with linen. You can't make this up. But you can fall asleep thinking about it. Nothing says luxury like a vacuum cleaner the size of a sedan, or a refrigerator that could double as a small apartment. The wealthy equip their homes with gadgets that today would be sold on late-night infomercials, except made entirely out of polished nickel. You begin your day not with a smartphone, but with the satisfying clunk of a switch the size of a paperback novel. It controls a single ceiling light, an opulent marvel in 1927. Electricity, after all, is still considered newfangled by some, like your cousin Henrietta, who insists candles are more romantic and only occasionally cause mansion fires. In your home, though, tech is the future, and you are the future's extremely well-funded beta tester. Step into the kitchen and marvel at the electric toaster, a glorious chrome monolith that toasts one slice at a time, requires constant supervision, and lets off a hiss that suggests it may be developing opinions. Still, it's better than using a long fork and a prayer near an open flame. Let's talk about the refrigerator. It's not the sleek, quiet hum machine you know today. No. This beast stands 6 feet tall, weighs as much as a grand piano, and announces itself with the roar of a small steam engine. It's essentially a metal cupboard with ambition, lined with block ice, humming menacingly, and capable of chilling an entire roast duck and your dreams of personal space. Your maid opens it carefully, lest the shelf groan ominously, and launch a jar of pickled aspic across the room. The vacuum cleaner is a thing of wonder. Picture a bulky, cylindrical contraption that looks like it was built to extract secrets from foreign diplomats. It's wheeled in like artillery, hosed down with cologne to mask the scent of hot dust, and operated by a member of staff trained in the fine art of domestic noise management. It takes 4 people to vacuum a single hallway. 1 to steer, 1 to keep the cord untangled, 1 to monitor pressure, and 1 to whisper encouragement. Then there's the central heating system, which is less of a system and more of a mysterious entity that only one man in the entire house understands. He lives in the basement, drinks heavily, and mutters in boiler code. But if all goes well, your bedroom reaches a comfortable 68 degrees by the time dinner is served. If not, you're issued an apology note and a velvet-lined hot water bottle with your initials on it. Intercoms are a thing now. Brass-plated boxes mounted on the walls that let you shout into various parts of the mansion without straining your voice or your sense of superiority. Of course, they only work when the staff remembers to turn them on, which is never during gossip hour. Occasionally, you'll press the button and hear nothing but static and a faint, muffled snort of laughter from the servants' wing. Still, the future has arrived, and it's slightly rude. In the boudoir, you may have an electric hair curler, which heats up in just under 15 minutes and smells like optimism and singed hair. The modern bathroom is also catching up. Bidets, heated towel racks, and personal hygiene devices that buzz ominously and are never spoken of aloud. Even entertainment has gone high-tech. Your phonograph is housed in a cabinet the size of a coffin and plays jazz with the subtle crackle of electricity and nostalgia. If you're especially cutting edge, you might even have a radio tuned to the latest swing hits and breaking news, assuming no one in the neighborhood decides to run a washing machine and disrupt the signal for 3 blocks. This is 1920s luxury, bulky, buzzing, and occasionally life-threatening, but also impressive. Your gadgets don't just function. They announce to anyone within earshot that you are ahead of the curve and possibly building a robot butler in your cellar. Because in the elite households of the pre-Depression era, convenience wasn't about saving time. It was about proving you could afford to spend extra just to turn on a light with flair. You don't drive. Driving is for people with responsibilities. Your personal fleet includes cars, horses, and possibly a boat for short trips to the grocery store. You ride in style, even if it means being perpetually late because your driver is busy polishing the hubcaps. Let's get one thing clear. Behind the wheel? That's not your place. That's where the help goes. Touching a steering wheel would be like changing your own oil or, heaven forbid, checking a tire's pressure. That's borderline manual labor, and you didn't claw your way to the top of society. Or marry someone who did, just to be seen clutching a gear shift with your bare hands. Your day begins with the distant rumble of an engine warming up somewhere below the east veranda. It's your Pierce Arrow, or your Duesenberg, or your Packard. Honestly, you can't keep track. They all have absurd names, a signature scent of leather and ego, and enough chrome to reflect your self-worth back at you in triplicate. The garage, naturally, is heated, staffed, and contains enough space to house your own minor car dealership. There's even a maintenance man whose sole purpose is to prevent squeaks. Your chauffeur, Percival, or something equally British-sounding, is a man of great dignity and zero humor. He wears gloves at all times, even in July. He does not smile. He once ran over a pheasant and held a small ceremony afterward. Percival knows the exact route to every club, estate, restaurant, and discreet speakeasy within 50 miles. He also knows how to keep a secret, which is worth more than gas money these days. Getting into the car is a process. First, Percival opens the door for you with a movement so crisp it's almost choreographed. You step inside, making sure not to wrinkle your trousers or your sense of superiority. The seats are upholstered in something absurd, like hand-stitched alpaca leather, and the back is stocked with a crystal decanter, smelling salts, and a copy of the Wall Street Journal that's somehow still warm. Of course, you're never in a rush. Being early is gauche, and being on time suggests you don't have better things to do, so you glide through the city like royalty on parade, nodding occasionally at pedestrians, just enough to imply generosity, but not enough to invite conversation. The streets may be filled with trolley cars and people on foot, but none of that matters. You're cocooned in your automobile, floating above it all in a suspended state of polished entitlement. When not being chauffeured, you occasionally allow yourself the quaint thrill of a horse-drawn carriage. It's not practical, but it is dramatic. And nothing says I have leisure time like arriving to lunch via an animal-powered procession. If it's a particularly sunny day, you might even switch to the roadster, roof down, scarf flapping, sunglasses on, pretending not to notice the clouds of dust kicked up behind you like a mobile aristocracy tornado. And then, of course, there's the launch. For errands near the lake or simply to make an entrance at a garden party no one asked you to attend, a small motorboat is available, staffed, fueled, and, ideally, named something ironic like the Modesty or Tax Shelter 2. You once took it to a dinner party 3 blocks away, because walking in shoes not blessed by an orthopedic butler is simply out of the question. Driving, for you, is a verb used by other people. People who know where their garage door opener is. People who honk. People who pump gas while wearing sweatpants. You, on the other hand, are driven, always driven, by a man who knows which roads have the best shade, where the potholes are buried, and how to pull up to the curb so smoothly it feels like docking a yacht. Because in 1920s high society, transportation isn't about getting somewhere, it's about being seen getting there, with polished hubcaps, spotless gloves, and zero physical effort. Anything less would be uncivilized. The average mansion before the Great Depression came with 20 bathrooms, an indoor pool, and enough guest rooms to accidentally host a small nation. Your home is less a place to live and more a statement of how little you actually need all that space. It doesn't have a front door, it has a front entrance complex. Stone columns that whisper I make money in my sleep, a driveway that takes longer to traverse than some novels, and a front hall so large you can echo your own regret across it for fun. The chandelier in the foyer weighs more than your horse and has killed at least 1 pigeon. You keep it anyway, mostly for the ambiance. When you say mansion, what you mean is palatial architectural overcompensation. The place has wings, not the chicken kind, the royal residence kind. East wing for guests, west wing for family, south wing for storage, aka the 37 couches you've never sat on. The north wing is mostly unused, rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a former housekeeper who still disapproves of your curtain choices. Each floor has its own personality. The ground level is for public life, parties, meetings, and dramatic stormy night declarations. Upstairs, it's a maze of bedrooms, dressing rooms, and mysterious locked doors even you don't remember commissioning. You once got lost in your own linen closet and had to be rescued by the third under butler. The library is vast, solemn, and lined with books you haven't read but would absolutely pretend to if cornered at a dinner party. It smells of mahogany, cigar, ghosts, and educational guilt. There's also a billiards room that nobody really uses, but you insist on calling it the gentleman's retreat to confuse guests. There are 2 drawing rooms, 3 parlors, and a room that exists solely for the arrangement of seasonal fruit displays. Let's not forget the ballroom. Every respectable mansion has one, and yours is aggressively echoey. It's large enough to host a royal wedding or, more realistically, 24 guests awkwardly standing around avoiding eye contact until someone breaks out the Charleston. You may dance once a year. You keep it polished daily. Priorities. The kitchen? Enormous. But again, you don't go in there. That's where the culinary magic happens, involving more copper pots than a medieval armory, and at least 4 people with specialty titles like sauce captain and toast engineer. The dining room is longer than some train cars, and set each morning just in case a duke decides to show up for breakfast. Spoiler, he doesn't. But the crystal still sparkles. Your bedroom, naturally, is a suite, not a room, a suite. You don't just sleep, you lounge, you drift, you recline theatrically. It includes a sitting area, 2 fireplaces, a fainting couch, for dramatic sighing, and a walk-in wardrobe with its own climate control and possibly its own postal code. The bathrooms, plural, are a marvel of excess. You have tubs, showers, and enough towels to dry an entire Olympic team. One bathroom is just for guests you only sort of like. Another is decorated entirely in Italian marble, because your cousin once complimented it in a hotel. And then there are the guest rooms, rows of them, each with its own theme, color palette, and a staff member who lightly fluffs the pillows at noon. Guests are often warned not to wander, because if you take a wrong turn, you might not be seen again until the next estate sale. Owning a mansion of this magnitude isn't about comfort. It's about symbolism. It says, I have more money than practical concerns, and yes, I did install a fountain indoors because the dog enjoys it. You might live in only 3 of the 60 rooms, but you could live in any of them. And that, apparently, is the point. Because before the Great Depression hit, the ultimate luxury wasn't what you owned. It was how dramatically unnecessary it all was. And nothing screams success like a hallway that requires a map, and possibly a Sherpa. Invitations engraved in gold, orchestras hidden behind hedges, and fountains flowing with champagne. A party isn't a party unless at least 2 senators and a minor European prince get lost in the conservatory. Throwing a party in the 1920s elite class wasn't about enjoyment. It was about dominance, social dominance, cultural dominance, fabric draping dominance, the kind of gathering where showing up in the wrong hat could ruin your family's reputation for 3 generations. These weren't get-togethers. They were organized, heavily catered declarations of status. Planning began months in advance, usually while sipping something expensive and pretending not to care. The guest list was curated by a committee consisting of your secretary, your secretary's secretary, and your aunt who once danced with the Duke and never shuts up about it. Invitations were printed on thick, scented cardstock that could double as a weapon. Each one had calligraphy so ornate you had to hire someone just to read it to you. Venues varied: ballrooms, gardens, private islands, or occasionally all 3. Why choose when you can rotate locations mid-party via horse-drawn gondola? Lighting was essential. Candles, gas lamps, electric chandeliers, and, for a brief period, an experimental setup involving phosphorescent fish. The goal was to glow so much guests couldn't see how little you liked them. Upon arrival, guests were greeted by a doorman, a footman, and someone whose only job was to say, "Welcome," in 5 languages. Coats were whisked away, monocles adjusted, and the mingling began. Introductions were whispered across martini glasses. No one remembered names. Everyone remembered jewelry. The dress code was strict. Gowns were long, dramatic, and sparkled like someone had spilled a stock portfolio on them. Tuxedos were tailored within an inch of their lives, complete with pocket squares starched into tiny origami swans. And hats, dear heavens, the hats! Some were so large they got their own seats at the dinner table. The music never stopped. There was always a band, often hidden somewhere bizarre, behind the rose bushes, in the dumbwaiter shaft, or suspended on a platform above the guests like a very jazzy chandelier. The sound of violins mixed with the clink of champagne flutes and the occasional scream from someone realizing they were standing on a priceless imported rug in their outdoor shoes. Let's talk about food. Tables buckled under the weight of canapes no one could pronounce. Oysters, caviar, roasted peacock, yes, really, and desserts, sculpted into architectural replicas of the host's summer home. There was always one bizarre new dish from Europe, like aspic of radish, which mostly served as a test of your social bravery. If you gagged, you were uninvited from future events. If you liked it, people assumed you were French. Drinks flowed like rivers, rivers you'd never swim in, unless you wanted to be tipsy, glamorous, and slightly dehydrated. Cocktails were new and thrilling, flouting prohibition with all the subtlety of a cannon blast. Some parties had hidden bars. Others skipped the hiding entirely and just turned the billiards room into a speakeasy. Password: I'm rich. Entertainment included fire eaters, operatic duets, spontaneous Charleston competitions, and once a pet monkey who painted miniature portraits of the guests. He was paid more than most musicians and got a write-up in Town and Country. At some point in the night, someone always fainted, ideally from joy, sometimes from the weight of their outfit, occasionally from the shrimp. It wasn't a successful party unless someone passed out on a chaise lounge while being fanned with a copy of the Times. Eventually, the night wound down. Shoes came off, gossip ramped up, and a few guests disappeared mysteriously into corridors they'd never find their way out of again. Morning arrived quietly. The staff cleaned up discreetly. The peacock was coaxed out of the punch bowl, and just like that, another gathering was complete, a glittering memory stitched together with pearls, piano notes, and the scent of scandal. Because in the Roaring Twenties, parties weren't just events. They were declarations of power, wealth, and champagne tolerance. And if someone didn't write a poem about it afterward, what was even the point? While the rest of the country pretended to sip grape juice, the elite were busy hiding cellars bigger than most bars. You drink gin from a teacup and pretend not to know where your cousin's speakeasy is located, even though it's just behind the fake bookshelf. Welcome to the most polite form of rebellion the upper crust ever staged, pretending they had no idea where all this alcohol kept coming from. It's 1926. Prohibition is in full swing, and technically, you're not supposed to drink. But you're also not supposed to wear a diamond watch to breakfast. And yet, here we are. First, let's talk about your liquor cabinet. You don't have one. You have a brass inlaid antique armoire imported from Venice, which just so happens to swing open with a secret latch, revealing shelves of whiskey, gin, and whatever that mysterious green bottle from Hungary is that no one can identify but everyone politely sips while grimacing. The staff knows. The dog knows. The dog's personal chef knows. But everyone maintains plausible deniability, like alcohol just materializes when you're rich enough to believe in it. The wine cellar? Oh, it's not a cellar. It's a subterranean gentleman's retreat. It has its own ventilation, temperature regulation, and a leather armchair no one is allowed to sit in because your great-grandfather once drank absinthe in it and declared war on France, briefly. Entire rooms are dedicated to Bordeaux vintages, hidden behind rotating fireplaces or trapdoors concealed beneath tiger rugs. One particularly clever installation is accessed only by playing a certain note on the grand piano. Hit the wrong key, and the panel opens to your tax records instead. You live on the edge. Then there are the speakeasies, the worst-kept secrets in high society. Yours, of course, is not a speakeasy. It's a themed lounge for cultural enrichment, located conveniently behind the third bookshelf in the West Study. Push in the copy of War and Peace, the shelf clicks, and you're in. Inside, a jazz trio, velvet booths, and more contraband liquor than a Coast Guard raid report. Passwords are required, naturally. Last week it was peacock. Today it's grapefruit. Tomorrow, Eleanor. Don't ask. Drinking etiquette in this underground world is specific. Champagne is served in crystal, whiskey in heavy-bottom tumblers, and gin, always gin, is disguised in porcelain teacups because nothing says innocent like sipping from fine china. You toast quietly. You sip slowly. You pretend not to see the senator across the room dancing with someone who is absolutely not his wife. Of course, acquiring the alcohol is half the sport. The less wealthy settle for bathtub gin and hope for the best. You, on the other hand, have a bootlegger with a name like Big Tony or Silent Franklin who delivers by night in unmarked crates labeled piano parts. He's discreet, reliable, and has a surprisingly nuanced opinion on Scotch blends. Cocktail hour is sacred. It begins precisely at 5, earlier if the weather is dramatic, and is conducted with the solemnity of a minor religious ceremony. Guests arrive, pretend to be surprised there's alcohol, and immediately request something stronger than their family dynamics. The butler mixes drinks with military precision and zero expression. His martini is legendary, his patience is not. And let's not forget the decoys. Everywhere there are props, decanters of ginger ale, ornate water pitchers, suspiciously ornate punch bowls. You once served Manhattans in hollowed-out pineapples just to throw off the clergy. A visiting bishop complimented the flavor and hasn't been quite right since. Because during Prohibition, being rich meant two things. You were above suspicion, and you were absolutely not above mixing cocktails in your linen closet. It wasn't just rebellion, it was theater, a performance of sophistication, silence, and just a dash of danger. And so you raise your teacup high, make polite conversation about jazz or fencing or divorce, and pretend the government isn't currently trying to take the edge off your buzz. In 1920s, elite society, sobriety was optional, but style? That was mandatory. Lunchtime is a competitive sport. If your salad doesn't involve at least 3 servants, a spritz of perfume, and a scandalous rumor about Mrs. Astor, you're simply not trying hard enough. The table is set with enough cutlery to perform minor surgery. Crystal glasses gleam under the chandelier, which, incidentally, has been dusted by a specialist who trained in Vienna and speaks exclusively in size. Place cards are handwritten in gold ink, because nothing stimulates the appetite like knowing exactly where your rivals are sitting. The guests arrive in waves of silk and judgment. Hats are large, voices are hushed, and perfume wafts across the room like an invisible competition. There's always that one guest who's accidentally wearing diamonds before dinner. Deeply improper, and therefore deeply admired. Small dogs peek out of handbags, and one woman has brought a parrot just for ambience. The parrot, it turns out, speaks fluent scandal. The meal begins with something dainty, chilled consommé, perhaps, or asparagus, arranged into a tragic little teepee. You don't actually eat much at lunch. Eating is for sustenance, and this is for performance. The salad is the main event, and it is a spectacle. It arrives on plates that have never known the dishonor of a microwave, crafted by a chef with a French accent so thick you're unsure if he's upset or just describing lettuce. It's not a salad. It's a concept, a narrative, a whimsical arrangement of frisée, roasted beets, poached pears, crumbled cheeses, imported nuts, and edible flowers that look like they know secrets. There's a spritz of perfume. Yes, perfume. Infused into the vinaigrette. So your arugula smells faintly like regret and rosewater. Forks are lifted with grace. No one chews. They consider textures. Meanwhile, the real meal is gossip. You nibble your salad while feasting on reputations. Did you hear about the Vanderbilt heir who eloped with a jazz singer? Shocking. Was Mrs. Astor actually seen playing bridge with a bootlegger? Unthinkable. And did you know someone at this very table has quietly begun wearing last season's shoes? Gasp. Stir your water slowly. Let that one sink in. Each course is interspersed with conversational volleys, subtle barbs, and coded compliments. "You're looking so well rested," someone says, which of course means, "You've done absolutely nothing for weeks, haven't you?" The hostess glides between guests like a benevolent queen, gently correcting etiquette lapses and making sure no one confesses to liking anything as pedestrian as ham. After the salad, something warm is presented, quiche perhaps, or a vegetable souffle that collapses under the weight of your disinterest. Dessert is light. Maybe a sorbet served in a hollowed-out lemon, or a floating island of meringue that dares you to acknowledge how hungry you still are. But it doesn't matter. You didn't come here to eat. You came here to be seen. Eating. The table linens are changed mid-meal. The servants move with the quiet precision of ballet dancers. Every crumb is whisked away before it hits the floor. A pianist plays something soft and European in the distance. No one knows who hired him. He's just always there. Playing. Judging. After dessert, coffee is served in cups so delicate they might evaporate in sunlight. A tray of chocolates makes the rounds, and guests pretend to hesitate before choosing one with the most dramatic filling. Conversation turns to light-hearted topics. Horses, inheritance law, passive-aggressive notes from the help. Eventually, guests drift toward the drawing room for post-lunch lounging. Pillows fluffed, fans are waved. One lady takes a fainting break. It's exhausting pretending to be full. Someone proposes a stroll through the garden, mostly to eavesdrop on private conversations that were whispered a little too close to the rosebushes. Because, in the 1920s, lunch in high society wasn't a meal. It was a three-act play starring salad, social warfare, and a guest list carefully curated to ensure maximum drama. You don't just dine. You perform, observe, and survive, one dainty forkful at a time. The afternoon is reserved for light activity, which means tennis, polo, or watching someone else play tennis while you drink more champagne. If you're feeling wild, you'll take a nap and dream about how much you're not working. The clock strikes 2, and you've officially entered the "no one expects anything of me" portion of the day. You change into something breezy, monochromatic, and extremely tailored. The fabric must whisper when you walk. Anything louder is considered poor taste. A servant appears to inform you that tennis has begun. You pretend to be surprised. You are not. You knew this because the sound of delicate grunting and the faint pop of a ball against racket has been drifting through the French doors for half an hour. But acknowledging it early would imply eagerness, and eagerness is exhausting. You step outside. The tennis court is pristine, manicured like a Versailles hedge, and probably the size of a small airport runway. 2 guests are already mid-match, locked in a spirited but fundamentally meaningless competition that no one is keeping score of. They're both wearing enough white to blind a pelican. You nod approvingly, sip your champagne, and settle into the spectators' lounge, which is really just a shaded bench with silk cushions and someone fanning you with a program from last week's opera. If you're in the mood, you might hit a few balls. Not too many, just enough to appear vital, without the risk of perspiration. A staff member retrieves each ball for you. You refer to it as exertion, and then immediately require a cool towel and a sit-down to recover from the mild trauma of physical activity. If tennis isn't your sport, and it often isn't, there's always polo. This involves horses, which is fun, and also other people getting covered in grass stains, which is more fun. You arrive halfway through the match, your hat large enough to obscure 3 people behind you. No one minds. Hats are allowed to block the view. It's considered a privilege. Back at the mansion, tea is being served on the lawn. Not just tea, afternoon tea. A proper noun. The kind of ritual that makes you forget you haven't done a single productive thing since 1919. The table is a masterpiece. Fine china, tiered trays of delicate sandwiches, and pastries so intricate they come with a disclaimer. Everything smells faintly of bergamot, gossip, and inherited wealth. You sip your tea slowly, pinky out, posture perfect. Conversation drifts from minor scandals to garden design to the abstract horrors of mortality. Someone brings up philosophy. You pretend to understand. You don't. But your nodding is flawless, and that's what matters. By 4 o'clock, you're staring at the clouds and wondering if the weight of expectation is heavier than your brocade waistcoat. You're not sad, exactly, just vaguely aware that you own 12 chaise lounges and none of them spark joy anymore. You sigh. Someone nearby notices and gently offers you a lemon tart. Crisis averted. For those who need to reset, the nap room is available. Not the bedroom, too intimate. The nap room, a quiet space with blackout curtains, soft harp music, and a chaise that cost more than a college education. You lie down and drift off for 20 minutes, dreaming of simpler times. Like last week, when someone else hosted lunch and you didn't have to pretend to like their asparagus pudding. Upon waking, you're gently handed a chilled towel and a small glass of restorative sherry. You blink, refreshed, mildly confused, and very certain you've done nothing to deserve this life. And that, of course, is the entire point. Because afternoon leisure in the roaring 20s wasn't about rest. It was a carefully choreographed pause between indulgences, a moment to reflect, sip, and ask yourself the eternal question, is it still too early to change into my evening jewels? Spoiler, it isn't. Between lunch and dinner, it's time for an outfit change. Because being seen in the same dress twice is a tragedy. Fashion is about subtle flexes, hats that block the sun, gloves that block the peasants, and shoes that will never touch actual dirt. The transition from day look to afternoon look is a delicate, almost ceremonial process. You can't just change clothes. You shed layers of social anxiety and replace them with hand-stitched silk. A valet or lady's maid appears precisely 14 minutes after the last teaspoon of sorbet is scraped from your dessert plate. They knock gently because fashion should never feel rushed. Then it begins. First, the robe. Always the robe. It's your transitional garment. A plush, quilted cloud that costs more than most people's rent. It whispers, luxury. It says, I'm not ready to be seen, but I am ready to be complimented. While you're robed, your staff prepares the outfit, capital O, always. The selection is not arbitrary. Weather, lighting, guest list, and minor grudges are all factored in. You wouldn't wear lavender if Mrs. Huntington is coming. She owns lavender. That's her whole thing. Instead, you opt for something paler, rarer, and significantly more difficult to pronounce. The new ensemble arrives on a padded hanger. Like royalty entering the room, everything is color coordinated, right down to the embroidery on your underthings, which no one will see, but you will know, and that's enough. The gown is tailored within an inch of its life, flaring gently in places that suggest you never eat bread and have complicated opinions about corsetry. For the gentleman, it's time to swap the morning coat for the afternoon ensemble. Perhaps a dove grey jacket, subtly pinstriped trousers, and a waistcoat that tells people, I may own a factory, but I've never actually seen it. Cravats are adjusted, lapels are brushed, and pocket squares are folded with a level of precision normally reserved for military operations and wedding seating charts. Accessories are crucial. Gloves, for instance, are non-negotiable. Not because your hands are cold, but because bare fingers are considered alarming. Gloves say, I am wealthy, delicate, and immune to your working-class germs. Hats are likewise mandatory. Wide brims, delicate netting, and the kind of feather arrangement that might cause flight delays if worn near an airfield. Shoes must be pristine. Yours never touch the ground unescorted. If you must cross a gravel path, a discreet mat is unrolled ahead of you. Heaven forbid dust finds its way into the hand-stitched Italian leather that wasn't even made for walking. Jewelry is calculated. Afternoon pieces must be noticeable, but not vulgar. You want guests to lean in and say, "Is that emerald?" Not, "My God, are you being mugged by your own brooch?" A tasteful locket, a single string of pearls, earrings that sparkle just enough to suggest generational trauma has been accessorized beautifully. Perfume, too, changes with the time of day. Morning was citrus and gardenia. Afternoon is lilac and unresolved tension. It's applied behind the ears, on the wrists, and in a subtle mist that hovers in your wake like an olfactory resume. Once dressed, you descend the grand staircase slowly. Every step a gentle announcement. You are ready to be observed. To promenade across lawns, to hold court beneath an umbrella, embroidered with your initials in thread, spun by spiders who were probably French. Fashion isn't about practicality. You could freeze in chiffon. You could fall in satin. But you'll do it looking impeccable. And if your hem catches a breeze, or your hat tilts at a mysterious angle, perfect. Now you're the talk of the afternoon, the subject of whispers, the accidental star of 6 watercolor sketches and an unsigned poem left on your chair. Because in high society, looking the part isn't optional. It's the game. And changing your outfit isn't vanity. It's strategy. After all, you never know who might be watching from the terrace, or worse, judging your gloves. The rich donate, but only in ways that ensure a building will be named after them. Charity balls, fundraisers, and the occasional anonymous donation that everyone definitely hears about before dessert. Welcome to the world of performative generosity, where giving is less about selflessness and more about brand management. You don't just donate money, you curate your benevolence. It's philanthropy with a side of foie gras and an engraved invitation list. It begins, of course, with a cause. Something noble, ideally vague, and just specific enough to sound like you care. Literacy, orphanages, the arts, or possibly saving some species of bird you've never seen but feel personally connected to because your niece once painted it. Once the cause is chosen, the real planning begins. The event. Because no one wants to hear about a check you mailed. They want gowns, chandeliers, and maybe a minor royal. Let's start with the charity ball. Held in a glittering ballroom that's only used for philanthropic purposes and the occasional scandal cover-up. The floors are polished to a mirror shine, the lighting is flattering to everyone over 40, and the waitstaff have been trained to say, "Thank you for your generosity," whether you've donated or not. You enter on a red carpet longer than a train platform, wearing something that says, "I care about people, but also, please photograph me." Dinner is served on porcelain that's probably older than some of the guests. Speeches are made. One of them is yours. You speak for exactly 3.5 minutes, striking the perfect tone of humble yet powerful. You mention the children, the animals, or the museum roof that will be saved thanks to your gallant sacrifice. Everyone applauds. A violinist dabs a tear. Then comes the auction, where people bid obscene amounts of money on things they don't need, just to show they can. A weekend in Monte Carlo, a painting of a horse, a dinner with someone from the New York Times. The numbers rise, paddles wave, and you raise your eyebrow at just the right moment to signal, I could win this, but I'm letting someone else have a turn. Sometimes you do it more discreetly. An anonymous donation appears in the newspaper the next day, accompanied by a suspiciously detailed description of your outfit and a quote from someone who was definitely sitting at your table. We don't know who gave the $100,000 to the opera fund, the reporter writes, but sources say she was wearing vintage Dior and sipping elderflower champagne. There's also the art of the building name, a new hospital wing, library annex, or marble staircase somewhere now bears your last name, preferably one with multiple syllables and at least one silent letter. It's not that you crave attention, it's just that the thought of people using the Lavenderton reading room without knowing who made it possible is spiritually upsetting. Other forms of philanthropy include hosting garden parties for awareness, endowing chairs at universities you've never visited, and founding obscure awards with names like the Amelia T. Worthington Medal for Excellence in Horticultural Discourse. You don't remember what it's for, but it looks great in the society pages. Of course, you believe in the cause. You do. But you also believe in fresh-pressed linen, imported caviar, and being seated next to someone who smells faintly of inherited land. Your generosity is real. It's just also very, very well lit. And when the night ends, the music softens, and the guests begin drifting toward the valet. You float past the exit table and murmur, "Let me know if there's anything else I can do." Which, in this world, translates roughly to, "Please spell my name correctly on the plaque." Because in the world of the fabulously wealthy, charity isn't just about doing good. It's about doing good while holding a flute of champagne, wearing couture, and ensuring the whole thing is documented by 3 society photographers and a painter with decent penmanship. And honestly, that's the most tasteful way to care. Shopping in the 1920s isn't about need. It's about spectacle. Whole streets shut down for your purchases, and salespeople know your dog's name and your favorite shade of imported silk. It begins with a handwritten note on monogrammed stationery. You summon your assistant, not for advice, but to alert the boutiques. "She's going shopping today," they whisper down the line like a royal decree. By noon, entire storefronts are rearranged in your honor. Doors are polished. Employees rehearse your name. One department store even installs a special cushion for your dog because he gets testy when velvet isn't Belgian. You don't shop alone, of course. You arrive in a motorcar long enough to house a small orchestra, flanked by a friend, a cousin, and someone referred to only as a companion, who's mostly there to say things like divine and "No, darling, go bolder." The sales clerks greet you like diplomats welcoming a foreign dignitary. Gloves are removed. Perfume is applied. Champagne is offered. Because what better way to choose upholstery than while gently tipsy? You glide through aisles of cashmere and cruelty, pointing to things you might wear once if the lighting is right. You try nothing on. Fittings are for other people. Your tailor will make it work. And if not, well, it becomes a very expensive gift for your niece who you think is still in boarding school. Your choices are boxed in layers of tissue paper so delicate they practically evaporate when touched. Each item is monogrammed, even the socks. Especially the socks. There's something very powerful about socks that know who they belong to. Shopping isn't just for clothes either. You buy jewelry that doesn't match anything on purpose, because clashing is chic now. You pick out furniture, rugs, whole dining sets for dinner parties that don't exist yet. At one point, you buy an entire chaise lounge because it reminds you of a man you met once on a train. You never saw him again. The chaise, however, will live forever in your solarium. Then there's the milliner. Ah, yes, the hat specialist. You try on 6 hats. One makes you look mysterious. One makes you look terrifying. One is so large it could qualify as its own shade structure. You buy them all because deciding is exhausting, and frankly, you deserve a reward for showing up. By mid-afternoon, your arms have never touched a bag. That's what porters are for. A line of them follows you like ducklings made of muscle and politeness, each carrying boxes labeled urgent, gift, or emotionally necessary. You briefly consider buying a piano just because you walked past one and felt powerful. You don't play. That's what musicians are for. And then, the most important stop of all, the perfume counter. Dozens of crystal vials, scents with names like Autumn's Sigh, Evening Regret, and Forbidden Belgium. You sample them all. You choose one that smells like aristocratic sorrow and champagne bubbles. The clerk nods. A fine choice, they lie, lovingly wrapping it in ribbon that costs more than soup. As you exit the shop, the doorman tips his hat. Your driver opens the door to your car with a look of practiced admiration. You've purchased 47 things and remember exactly 4 of them. Doesn't matter. You'll be delighted all over again when they're delivered tomorrow, each with a personalized note and a small misunderstanding about what you actually asked for. Because in the 1920s, shopping wasn't about practicality. It was about declaring your taste, your status, and your emotional availability to taffeta. Amazon may ship in 2 days, but it will never offer the quiet thrill of a clerk nervously explaining that they only have 12 of something you want 30 of. And honestly, if you don't leave the store with your wallet lighter and your ego slightly heavier, were you even shopping? Vacations aren't for rest, they're for flaunting. Why take a normal train when you can charter a private car and bring 12 trunks for a weekend trip? Travel is just another excuse to be seen. Let's be clear. The destination is irrelevant. You may be heading to Newport, Palm Beach, or a country you can't pronounce but recently purchased land in. Doesn't matter. What matters is the journey, darling. And that journey begins with an itinerary so ornate it's practically a novella. Printed on thick cardstock, embossed in gold, and hand-delivered to every member of your traveling party, yes, including the dog. Packing is a full-day event, requiring the efforts of 3 maids, 2 valets, and a man who does nothing but fold silk. You'll need travel clothes, lounging clothes, dinner clothes, emergency fox hunting attire, just in case, and at least one outfit for being dramatically stranded. Trunks are labeled, stacked, and sealed with ribbons that coordinate with your luggage tags. If it all fits in fewer than 6 steamer trunks, you've clearly forgotten something important. Like your portable cocktail cabinet. Your train doesn't leave the station, it waits for you, because you don't buy a ticket. You book an entire car, maybe 2, possibly a whole train, depending on how emotionally fragile you're feeling that week. Your private rail car is upholstered in velvet, scented with lavender, and stocked with champagne, newspapers you don't read, and one very confused parlour-maid who didn't know trains could be this fancy. The moment you board, travel becomes theatre. You recline on tufted cushions, sipping cocktails while the countryside rolls by in a blur of unwashed public. Meals are served in the dining salon on fine china that clinks softly with every bump in the tracks. You dine on oysters and caviar, watching fields drift past while commenting vaguely on rural charm. Someone brings a phonograph, someone else brings a small harp. There is a brief dispute over whether the harp clashes with the curtains. The harp wins. Of course, rail isn't your only option. For coastal getaways, you have a yacht, not a boat, a yacht. Emphasis on the ya. Your yacht has a name, something absurd and pretentious, like the Untaxed, Pearl of Efficiency, or simply Mine. It features a crew of 15, multiple decks, and a small library no one uses except the parrot. You entertain guests on board, naturally. Nothing screams wealth like serving chilled lobster while gently drifting past people who can't afford binoculars. Sunbathing happens in formal wear. Afternoon cocktails are served at sea with the same ceremony as a royal coronation. If someone gets seasick, they're politely escorted to a less embarrassing location, like the mainland. When ships and trains won't do, there's always the motorcar caravan. You and your friends take to the roads in matching convertibles, trailing trunks, dust, and chaos. You drive precisely nowhere, in perfect formation, to impress absolutely everyone. Picnics are staged beside waterfalls that were inconvenient to reach but look marvelous in hand-colored photographs. Wherever you go, arrival is an event. You step off the train or descend the gangplank, draped in travel garments so elegant they defy wrinkles and logic. Local staff stare in awe. A band plays something jazzy and dramatic. You nod, graciously, as if you weren't just napping with your mouth open 20 minutes ago. And when you reach your destination, you immediately begin planning your return. Not because you're homesick, but because going home also requires a full wardrobe, an exit brunch, and a final look of mild disdain at the local scenery. Because in the world of the 1920s elite, travel isn't about seeing new places. It's about being seen going to them, with steamer trunks, silk gloves, and absolutely zero concern for luggage fees. There are clubs for everything: yachting, fencing, eating cheese with the correct fork. The main activity is excluding anyone whose money is less than 50 years old. Welcome to the exclusive world of clubs so secret you probably walked past 5 of them and didn't even know it. That's the point. If you can find it, you're clearly not supposed to be there. These are the gilded hideaways of the American elite, where fortunes are maintained, alliances are whispered over lobster thermidor, and no one dares wear suede after Wednesday. Every city has one, usually housed inside a converted mansion, a suspiciously nondescript brownstone, or a building that looks like it has opinions about your handshake. There's no sign, no open hours. Just a pair of heavy wooden doors guarded by a man who can spot new money by the way it buttons its coat. Membership is not requested. It is inherited, offered, or stealthily arranged by someone's uncle who once helped the mayor bury a zoning scandal. You do not apply. You are invited, possibly after a probationary lunch where your choice of dessert and conversational restraint are judged like an Olympic sport. The correct answer is lemon tart and exactly one opinion on tariffs. Inside, everything is upholstered. Walls, chairs, people, the air smells faintly of mahogany, old books, and tobacco from a pipe that's been ceremonially lit since 1883. Conversation is a soft murmur. Laughing too loudly is frowned upon. So is excessive blinking. There are clubs for every imaginable activity, so long as that activity involves not working. The yachting club, the polo guild, the gentlemen's afternoon discussion society, mostly an excuse to drink port, complain about bridge scores. One club is dedicated solely to the appreciation of mustaches. Another exists purely so members can gather once a year to argue about the Oxford comma. Dress codes are aggressively enforced. No sneakers, no denim, no visible emotions. You must arrive in formal wear, or at the very least, something tailored enough to suggest generational wealth. Women, if permitted, must wear something that whispers quietly of European schooling and never having been on a public tram. The real purpose of these clubs, however, is networking without actually admitting it's networking. You don't talk business. You discuss civic priorities over brandy. You don't lobby for influence. You share thoughts during the billiards break. A handshake in the lounge can move more money than a dozen boardrooms. Deals are made without eye contact. Agreements are sealed with a nod and a third refill of your sherry. There are rules. Ancient, unspoken, and enforced with eyebrow raises. Don't bring up politics unless everyone agrees. Don't name drop unless it's your own family. And never ask what someone actually does for a living. If they're here, it's assumed they don't need to. And then there are the rituals. Annual dinners with toasts in Latin, secret handshakes that look suspiciously like jazz hands, a ceremonial carving of the roast duck that only one man is allowed to perform. And no one remembers why. It doesn't matter. He has the duck knife, and tradition is sacred. Of course, there's always a little mystery. A locked room no one speaks of. A portrait in the hallway, with eyes that definitely follow you. One club has a rumoured underground tunnel connecting it to the opera house. Another has a cellar labelled cheese vault that may or may not be code for something political. Because in the roaring 20s, secrecy wasn't shady, it was fashionable. Privacy meant power. And belonging to a club wasn't about leisure. It was about telling the world, I know things you don't. Wear vests for fun, and own 4 pocket watches, all inherited. And if you ever manage to find the entrance, remember the motto whispered through generations of velvet curtains. If you have to ask what the club does, you probably shouldn't be here. Rich kids were basically small, well-dressed investments. They're cared for by governesses, forbidden from doing anything fun, and expected to play the piano at dinner or risk being sent to boarding school in Switzerland. It begins the moment they're born, usually in a heavily curtained nursery lined with wallpaper that costs more than the average worker's annual salary. The crib is carved mahogany. The rattles are sterling silver. The baby blanket is made from rare Peruvian llama wool and monogrammed, just in case someone mistakes this infant for a regular baby. The child's schedule is set by a team. The governess, the nanny, the French tutor, and someone referred to only as Miss Plum. It is unclear what Miss Plum actually does, but she's always nearby with a very serious bonnet and a terrifyingly gentle voice. The parents are around, somewhere, occasionally glimpsed through a carriage window. The day begins at precisely 7 a.m. with a light breakfast of porridge, fresh fruit, and subtle pressure to live up to the family legacy. The child is dressed not by themselves, heaven forbid, but by a small battalion of assistants. Socks are adjusted with surgical precision. Hair is brushed into compliance. No one under the age of 10 has seen their own reflection without assistance. Then it's time for education, not school. Lessons. Conducted in the drawing room by a governess with a library's worth of credentials and the patience of a heavily sedated saint. Subjects include literature, penmanship, ancient Greek, fencing theory, not practice too dangerous, and Latin, because nothing says childhood joy like declining verbs in a dead language. Music lessons are mandatory. You will learn piano. You will not enjoy it. If you're lucky, you'll also be allowed to dabble in violin, but only if your posture is deemed emotionally stable. By age 9, you are expected to sight read Chopin and perform it with the emotional depth of a widowed duchess. Recess consists of structured walks, closely monitored play with siblings, and supervised encounters with ponies who have better hair than you. Dirt is forbidden. Running is discouraged. Laughing loudly is considered unrefined unless it's in French. Lunch is served in the nursery dining room, a misleading term, as no one is allowed to speak above a whisper or request second helpings. Meals are nutrient balanced and taste like etiquette. Dessert is a single sugared plum and a brief moment of eye contact with the cook, who you suspect may be your only true ally. The afternoon features more lessons. Embroidery for the girls. and quiet contemplation for the boys. This sounds like a break, but really, it's just a formal way of saying, sit still and think about your inheritance. Reading is encouraged, as long as it's morally improving and includes at least one moral dilemma resolved through impeccable posture. Occasionally, children are paraded downstairs to say hello to guests. This is known as the children's hour, and it is both a test and a trap. You must curtsy or bow, recite something memorized, and possibly play a small piece on the piano while adults sit port and pretend to care. Smiling too much is considered frivolous. Smiling too little might send you straight to Switzerland. By evening, you are escorted upstairs by candlelight. Bath time involves an unnecessarily large tub, lavender soap, and exactly 4 splashes before the fun is declared over. Bedtime stories are read in a soothing monotone from books with titles like Moral Tales for Upright Youth or The Dangers of Idleness. A cautionary fable. And as you drift off to sleep under a heavy quilt stitched by French nuns, your final thought is simple. One day, you too may inherit a vast fortune, and the crippling expectation to raise children who never smile in photographs. Because in high society, children aren't just people. They're a long-term investment portfolio in patent leather shoes. Your personal physician comes to you, armed with leeches, dubious advice, and a bottle of brandy. If you sneeze, someone fetches a specialist. If you stub your toe, you get a week off from strenuous thinking. Being rich in the 1920s means you don't visit the doctor. The doctor visits you, always. Preferably through a side entrance, wearing a hat that says, "I'm here for your gout, not your reputation." His medical bag contains everything from smelling salts to a silver thermometer to whatever tonic he brewed in his cousin's garage. You don't question it. He went to Harvard, or said he did. Your physician is more than just a doctor. He's part confidant, part therapist, part dinner guest, who occasionally checks your pulse between bites of lamb. He drinks your brandy, compliments your wallpaper, and vaguely recommends rest and fluids for almost every condition. Sometimes he prescribes mercury. Sometimes he prescribes travel. Sometimes he just shrugs and says, "It's the nerves," which is code for, "I have no idea, but you're paying me in cashmere." If you're a woman, the diagnosis is almost always nerves, hysteria, or overexposure to reading. You are given laudanum, a fainting couch, and perhaps a very expensive trip to the seaside to recover from the trauma of having your own opinions. For men, it's more heroic. Diagnoses like exhaustion from executive thinking or tennis shoulder. You are ordered to relax, play cards, or smoke something medicinal while staring out at your estate. Your medicine cabinet is a museum of barely legal substances. Tinctures of opium, cocaine tooth drops, and syrups with soothing agents that are never explained. There's a pill for sleep, a pill for alertness, and a powder you stir into champagne if you feel slightly uncharming. For anything more serious, you summon a specialist from Boston. He travels by private railcar, wears a monocle, and arrives with an assistant who does nothing but hold his hat. He examines you for 20 minutes, declares your spleen magnificently misunderstood, and bills you the equivalent of a house. Minor ailments are major events. A sore throat earns you a handwritten note from your secretary announcing your unavailability. A sprained ankle means no dancing for the week, and at least 2 pity bouquets from your wealthiest rivals. If you cough in front of guests, someone quietly draws the curtains, as if your lungs have offended polite society. Mental health? Oh, you mean nervous disposition. This is treated with silent walks, cold compresses, And, if things get truly dire, a retreat to a sanitarium with heated floors and suspiciously few actual patients. You return weeks later, paler, calmer, and slightly more committed to never speaking about your feelings again. Children are subjected to a rotating cast of pediatric experts who mostly recommend cod liver oil, structured outdoor play, and not talking during meals. Vaccines exist, but only if your physician likes you. Braces are for the poor. If a child breaks an arm, it's set with imported splints and followed by 6 weeks of lounging in the nursery, being hand-fed pudding and existential dread. And let's not forget the gossip. The doctor knows things. He's seen the inside of every mansion, heard the whispered complaints, treated the mysterious indiscretions. He pretends not to notice that Mrs. Worthington is suddenly recovering abroad, or that Mr. Ashby's cough sounds suspiciously like shame. The doctor says nothing, but his silence is expensive, and his eyebrows are fluent in secrets. Because in the 1920s elite world, medicine isn't just about health. It's about drama, discretion, and ensuring you can still look fabulous while bedridden. Illness is simply an opportunity to wear silk robes, drink bitters, and reflect dramatically in a handheld mirror. After all, what's the point of being sick if no one's around to fuss about it? Dinner is 12 courses, 5 forks, and enough silverware to arm a small militia. You're expected to converse intelligently, look decorative, and never, ever admit you don't know what aspic is. The evening begins long before the food arrives. You spend at least an hour being draped in your evening attire, an outfit chosen specifically to impress people you only moderately like and fully intend to outdress. Everything from your shoes to your scent has been curated to whisper, "Yes, I do own several oil wells. And no, I won't be sharing them." Downstairs, the dining room has been set like a battlefield of elegance. The table stretches into the distance, polished to a mirror shine, and crowded with crystal, porcelain, and silver in configurations that would overwhelm a NASA engineer. Each place setting has more forks than you have fingers. One for fish, one for salad, one for revenge. Candles are lit. Music begins, ideally a string quartet, though a harpist hiding behind a fern is also acceptable. Footmen glide silently between chairs, adjusting napkins with the precision of neurosurgeons. No one speaks yet. Not because it's forbidden, but because everyone is too busy pretending they're not waiting to be told where to sit. Seating arrangements are a delicate game of social chess. You're placed according to a hierarchy so complex it might actually require divine intervention. You are not next to your spouse. That would be far too modern. Instead, you're between the third cousin of a duke and someone who insists on being called countess despite suspiciously American vowels. The meal begins with consommé, a clear broth served in shallow bowls and discussed as if it were a geopolitical issue. This is followed by a parade of dishes so elaborate you start to suspect the chef is in crisis. Oysters arrive on a throne of shaved ice. A tiny game hen is presented with a sprig of rosemary and what might be a pearl necklace. Then comes aspic, meat encased in a translucent jelly that wobbles ominously and tastes like forgotten ambition. The wines change with every course. You nod knowingly even though you can't pronounce most of them. Your glass is never empty, thanks to a butler who appears the moment you blink. By the time the fish arrives, delicately poached and topped with a sauce that's been passed down through generations of emotionally distant Frenchmen, you're floating somewhere between tipsy and philosophically confused. Conversation flows like the Madeira. You discuss politics in the vaguest terms possible. You compliment the host's new marble floors. You pretend to care deeply about someone's trip to Vienna. The goal is to be charming, mysterious, and mildly unapproachable. Laughing too loudly is gauche, unless it's at something in French, in which case, très chic. By course 7, the meat arrives. Always dramatic. Always carved tableside by a man whose sole purpose is to make roast beef seem like a religious experience. Sides include vegetables so overcooked they might have seen the Civil War. No one touches the peas. The peas are ornamental. Cheese follows, then salad, then sorbet to cleanse the palate, which is code for, "We're not done punishing you with cutlery." Dessert is a multi-tiered triumph of sugar, architecture, and structural engineering. There is likely spun sugar involved, maybe fire. Finally, after 2 hours and one identity crisis, coffee is served. You don't ask for it, it simply materializes. Petite fours arrive on a tray held by a man who looks like he hasn't blinked since Prohibition began. You take one. You're full. But it's tradition. And tradition must be obeyed, because in the world of the Gilded Age, elite, dinner isn't about hunger. It's about spectacle, status, survival of the most symmetrical. And if you leave the table without mild indigestion and 3 new enemies, were you even at dinner? Evenings wind down with cognac, billiards, and competitive cigar smoking. If you're not slightly tipsy and surrounded by people with titles longer than their job history, you're doing it wrong. The grand dining room is finally behind you. 12 courses, 42 polite nods, and one suspicious comment about someone's hat have left you emotionally full and spiritually dehydrated. But now is when the real evening begins. The one that doesn't involve salad forks or French verbs. You adjourn to the lounge. It's called a lounge because room where you sit around and forget how to stand sounded too honest. The lighting is dim, the furniture is deep, and the air smells like tobacco, wood polish, and secrets someone brought back from Europe. A tray appears. You didn't summon it. You never summon anything. Things simply arrive. Cognac is poured into balloon glasses, because if your drink doesn't have enough surface area to double as a bird bath, you're clearly poor. The liquid is warm, gold, and older than most of your friendships. Cigars are offered next. Stored in a humidor, so fancy it might actually have a mortgage. You don't light it yourself, don't be ridiculous. A man in white gloves approaches with a silver flame that probably once lit Queen Victoria's Christmas pudding. You puff once, then twice, then nod like someone who has deep thoughts and no interest in sharing them. Conversations shift gears. You're no longer performing for the dinner table. You're unwinding, slowly, like a wealthy watch. Topics now include investments, scandalous behavior in Monte Carlo, and whether or not Count von whatever actually exists or was invented by someone who wanted a more interesting poker night. Games begin. Billiards, for those feeling competitive. Bridge, for those wishing to settle old scores through silent judgment. Poker, for those who enjoy bluffing while wearing cufflinks the size of apricots. No one plays for real money, or if they do, no one admits it. The chips are ivory, the stakes are unclear, and the only thing truly on the line is your social standing. Occasionally, someone makes a toast. No one listens, but we all raise our glasses out of habit and shared trauma from finishing the aspic earlier. The room is hazy, not just from cigar smoke, but from the slow melting of time. There's no clock in the lounge, only a grandfather timepiece that hasn't ticked since Roosevelt's last mustache trim. Now comes the gossip. Low voices, raised eyebrows. Did you hear about Evelyn's new companion? Someone whispers, as if the furniture might tell. He's Italian and suspiciously good at fencing. This is followed by knowing looks and another round of brandy. By midnight, half the guests have removed their jackets. A scandal in itself. Cravats loosen, posture sags. The laughter gets a little louder, but never vulgar. You're still in polite society after all, just the unfiltered, slightly wobbly version. One gentleman has fallen asleep in a wingback chair. No one wakes him. That's called diplomacy. For the bold, there's an adjoining room. A little more velvet, a little less supervision. Cards are dealt with an air of quiet desperation. A soprano record plays in the background. Someone claims to know Hemingway personally. Someone else is quietly pocketing silverware as a joke. Maybe. Eventually, the fire dies down. A last pour is made. Someone mumbles something about tomorrow's hunting trip, which no one will attend. You rise, not because you want to, but because the room is starting to spin counterclockwise and your monocle is fogging slightly. You retire to your quarters under the pretense of needing an early start. In truth, you're just full of wine, gossip, and the crushing realization that you may have bet your horse stable on a bad hand of whist. But don't worry. You'll be back here tomorrow night, with fresh cigars, the same stories, and a vague sense of entitlement floating on top of your third brandy. Because in the world of the elite, debauchery is never wild. It's tasteful, measured, and always ends with someone mumbling, "Just one more game," as the candles burn down to nothing. Before Instagram, there were oil paintings, huge, slightly terrifying portraits of you and your family looking faintly annoyed. Images everything, and you'll sit for hours just to look like you don't have a care in the world. The portrait is not optional. It's a rite of passage, a declaration, a generational marketing campaign that says, "We were here, we had cheekbones, and we owned at least 2 factories." Your family doesn't pose for fun. You pose for legacy. The process begins weeks in advance. Not with an appointment, heaven forbid anything be that simple, but with a summons. The artist, a well-regarded gentleman with a monocle and a mysterious past in Paris, is invited to stay at the estate. He is assigned a guest room, a personal assistant, and a bowl of fruit he won't touch but will talk about constantly. Then comes the wardrobe consultation. You don't just throw on whatever's clean. Each outfit is selected to reflect power, stability, and seasonal trends in moral superiority. The children are dressed like miniature nobles. You wear enough velvet to smother a bishop. Your spouse is gently styled to suggest fertility, piety, or both. Even the family dog gets a blowout. The background must tell a story. A rolling landscape to hint at land ownership. A grand library to suggest literacy. A marble column, inexplicably indoors, to convey Roman values or at least strong thighs. The goal is to look effortlessly magnificent. The reality is you've spent 3 days arguing about curtain placement and whether your youngest child can be trusted not to blink. Then you sit. You don't smile, that would be tacky. Instead, you stare just past the artist, as if you've glimpsed the future, and it involves even more wealth. Your mouth is closed. Your hands are posed in what painters call noble restraint, and what normal people call aggressively uncomfortable. Children are bribed with sweets. The baby is held by a governess who is later painted out entirely. The artist mumbles things like, "Hold that expression, no, more aloof. Yes, more indifferent to suffering." You're expected to stay motionless for hours. If you shift, the artist sighs dramatically and starts over. You once moved a finger and set the process back 3 days. Meals are delayed. Conversations are whispered. Everyone lives in fear of sneezing. At one point, the dog sneezes and is quietly replaced by a more photogenic spaniel. The artist paints layer by layer. First, the underpainting. Then the skin tones. Then the highlights. the shadows, the glint in your eye that suggests you know things, probably about railroads. He works in silence, occasionally muttering things like, "More gravitas," or "The drapes are lying to me." When the portrait is finally complete, it is unveiled in a private ceremony that feels suspiciously like a wedding, but with more applause. Everyone gathers. There is polite nodding. Someone weeps. Your spouse says, "I look stern," and the artist takes this as a compliment. You stare at yourself, 10 years younger, slightly taller, and definitely better lit. The painting looks nothing like reality, which is precisely the point. It is then hung in the main hallway, high enough to suggest reverence, low enough to intimidate passing servants. A brass plaque is added. Visitors pause to admire it. Children are warned never to touch it. The family ghost, if you have one, begins haunting it out of professional jealousy, because in the 1920s, a family portrait wasn't about capturing who you were. It was about presenting who you wanted to be remembered as: stoic, wealthy, and dressed like upholstery. No filters, no edits. Just oil, canvas, and the quiet scream of a 7-year-old holding that pose for 5 hours. And long after you're gone, that enormous painting will remain, watching, judging, reminding your descendants that they, too, must one day sit still and look casually immortal. There's always another party, another house, another jewel. Status is a competition, and the real winner is whoever can build a summer home in the shape of their own ego. In the roaring 1920s, being rich wasn't enough. You had to be richer, flashier, more mysterious. If you simply inherited a fortune and managed it wisely, congratulations, you were boring. But if you threw dinner parties that ended in a champagne-fueled waltz across the roof, now that was culture. Everything, absolutely everything, was a game of one-upmanship. Your rival buys a yacht, you buy a fleet. They get a Renoir, you commission a painting of your cat in the style of Renoir. They summer in the Hamptons. You buy the part of the coast they're not allowed to look at and build a marble statue of yourself just to ruin their view. Parties were weapons. Invitations were sharpened like blades. "You're invited" actually meant, "You weren't invited last time, and I'm making a point." Guest lists were composed with military precision. Seating charts were passive-aggressive manifestos. You'd know exactly where you stood in society based on whether you were seated next to a duchess or the coat rack. Even charity events were competitive blood sport. One heiress throws a ball for the orphanage. You host an entire opera in the orphanage and make the children sing the overture. People clapped, not for the music, for the gesture. There were architecture feuds. One man adds a ballroom, his rival adds 2, and then casually mentions that the floor is made of imported Venetian glass blessed by a pope. Another woman builds a conservatory so vast it has its own weather system. Her neighbor retaliates by planting a hedge maze and hiring a butler to explain it. Houses weren't homes, they were declarations. One tycoon builds a staircase so long you need a snack halfway up. His neighbor installs 2 grand staircases, one for ascending and one for descending, because elegance means never sharing footsteps. Kitchens were stocked not with food but with envy. If your refrigerator wasn't chrome and big enough to house a cow, were you even trying? Jewelry was another battleground. Brooches weren't decorative, they were strategic armor. If someone wore diamonds, you wore historical diamonds, preferably ones with a tragic backstory involving Russian royalty, emeralds the size of gobstoppers, sapphires named after disgraced monarchs. You didn't wear jewelry to shine, you wore it to silence a room. Even gossip was weaponized. Whispers of scandal were currency. "Did you hear about the Astors?" Someone would murmur. while fanning themselves just hard enough to imply they knew everything. Reputation was everything. And if you couldn't defend yours in polite conversation, you'd better be able to buy out the newspaper. Children were also dragged into it. Not literally, too undignified, but metaphorically launched like tiny social missiles. Your daughter debuts at 17. Mine debuts at Versailles, with fireworks. Your son goes to Harvard? Mine has a private tutor who founded Harvard. And don't forget fashion. Hats that blocked sunlight and social interaction. Gowns that required scaffolding. Gloves so delicate you needed a specialist just to put them on. To be seen wearing the same outfit twice was to admit defeat. You might as well turn in your tiara. But for all the drama, the rivalry, the performative generosity and rhinestone battles, it wasn't really about the things. It was about being seen, noticed, whispered about behind fans. They didn't want to be happy. They wanted to be legendary. Because in the world of the ultra-rich, being rich wasn't the end goal. Being envied was. And if you had to build a 40-room guest house just to host the people who didn't make the cut for your real party, so be it. It's not personal. It's just class warfare. But with better champagne, as you slip into bed, you're blissfully unaware that in just a couple years, everything will change. The world is about to spin off its axis. But for now, your biggest problem is deciding which silk pajamas to wear to breakfast. Your mansion is quiet, save for the faint hum of someone polishing a hallway you haven't walked through in months. The jazz has died down. The pearls have been locked away. Your butler has finally gone to bed, after ironing your sleepwear and muttering something ominous in French. Outside, the stock market is doing unexplainable things, but you don't worry. Why would you? Numbers always go up. Money flows like your imported Bordeaux. Everyone you know is building something bigger, flashier, more Roman columns. It's the American dream, now with foie gras. You've never felt richer, which is precisely the problem. The signs are there, if you squint. Your favorite investment banker is suddenly very interested in livestock. Your cousin Gerald can't stop talking about liquidity with the same nervous energy usually reserved for small fires. And yet, every week there's another party, another toast, another shimmering dress made entirely out of hope and delusion. A whisper of doubt enters the room, dressed as a dinner guest who casually mentions economic instability between spoonfuls of caviar. Everyone laughs. How quaint. You order more champagne. Someone plays the piano aggressively. Crisis averted. Magazines still gush about record profits. Socialites still pose in gowns designed to collapse under their own opulence. And Wall Street? It's a non-stop parade of cigars, speculation, and men shouting about shares they do not understand. The word bubble is tossed around once, but quickly hushed. Too undignified for a boardroom with crystal decanters, even your staff begins to notice. Cook's cousin loses her job. The chauffeur mutters about gasoline prices. A footman asks if his wages are secure. You reassure him with the confidence of someone who has never read a balance sheet but owns 6. It's fine. Everything's fine. Just keep dancing. Banks are giving out loans like party favors. Got a pulse? Here's a house. Want to invest in synthetic radish futures? Of course. What could go wrong? Everyone's portfolio is made of dreams, promises, and deeply unstable math. But in your world, risk is just something poor people worry about. You host a dinner for a visiting duke. He casually jokes that Europe is bracing for a market correction. The room goes quiet for a moment before someone sneezes and distracts the entire table. You return to debating whether monogrammed towels are still chic, tragically middle class. Evening after evening, the illusion holds. The orchestra plays louder. The wine pours faster. The dresses sparkle harder, as if sequins can hold the economy together. And every time a paperboy shouts headlines about bank troubles, someone offers him a nickel and tells him to sing something cheerful. But beneath it all, there's a tremor, small, insistent, like a cracked chandelier swaying slightly out of rhythm. Something's coming. You can feel it in the pauses between conversations, the hesitation in your accountant's voice, the silence when someone asks, "So what exactly is a margin call?" Still, you climb into your oversized bed, surrounded by feather pillows, gilded sconces, and the quiet belief that wealth is a shield, that fortunes are permanent, that parties never end. You fall asleep, dreaming of yachts and champagne and marble staircases wide enough to land a plane. And just down the road, the economy is teetering on a knife's edge, held together with speculation, wishful thinking, and a prayer to the god of unchecked capitalism. Because this is the eve of disaster, and while you button up your pajamas and fluff your monogrammed pillow, history is quietly clearing its throat, preparing to flip the switch. Owning a lawn isn't enough. You need rolling vistas, imported hedges, and at least one peacock who looks perpetually unimpressed. Garden parties are an excuse to make everyone admire your shrubbery while pretending not to notice your neighbor's suspiciously wilted rose bushes. If you haven't lost a small child in your hedge maze by sundown, did you even host a proper soiree? Landscaping, in this world, is not about nature, it's about control. Every vine is meticulously trained, every flower bed shaped like a metaphor for your status. Your lawn isn't green, it's curated, fertilized by science, trimmed by precision, and stared at daily by a man with opinions about clover. Your estate boasts topiaries so elaborate they require a live-in artist. There's a shrub shaped like a swan, another like Napoleon, and one that just says, "Success" in cursive. The peacocks patrol this kingdom of foliage with disdain, silently judging any guest who wears last season's hat or refers to begonias as basic. Your gardener is not just a gardener. He's a philosopher with pruning shears. He speaks in Latin plant names and occasionally disappears for days to contemplate moss. You once overheard him muttering about a rival estate's lavender borders like they'd insulted his grandmother. Which, to be fair, they kind of had. Then there's the garden party, a ritual steeped in tradition, subtle aggression, and finger sandwiches. Invitations are engraved, scented, and hand-delivered by someone who definitely resents their job. Guests arrive precisely late, dressed in flowing fabrics that whisper against the breeze. No one walks, they glide. Tables are set up under a canopy of trees so symmetrical they could cause an existential crisis. Champagne flows like irrigation. Harpists play something baroque near the koi pond. And somewhere, always somewhere, someone is standing near a statue pretending not to notice the statue is them. Small talk is the primary activity. You discuss the weather as if you own it. And you probably do. Your estate has its own barometer. You compliment other people's gardens with the precise tone used for mediocre art. Your delphiniums are very brave this season. There's always a theme. Midsummer in Marseille. English decay. A celebration. One party was simply titled Lavender. Everyone wore lilac and spoke in half-truths. Someone brought a parrot. It recited Oscar Wilde and Bitter Duke. If you're truly committed, your garden includes features of escalating absurdity. A reflecting pool, for reflecting. A Grecian gazebo no one's allowed to touch. A flock of doves released at sunset to symbolize either peace or your ability to afford doves. No one's quite sure. Children are dressed like miniature lords and promptly vanish into the shrubbery. At least one ends up trapped in the hedge maze and emerges at dusk, speaking only in metaphors. This is considered a developmental milestone. Meanwhile, staff scurry about with trays of chilled cucumber, things no one asked for, and glasses of punch infused with herbs that may or may not be illegal. Someone whispers that the Earl of whatever is using artificial turf near the tennis lawn. A collective gasp. Scandal has arrived. By twilight, the party is in full bloom. Lanterns sway gently from the trees. Perfume and pollen mingle in the air. Guests float from peony cluster to Prosecco fountain, pretending they aren't absolutely judging each other's wisteria. The peacock climbs the fountain. No one stops him. He's the real host now. As the night winds down, and guests depart with delicate yawns and passive-aggressive compliments, you survey your kingdom of curated chaos. You've outgardened them all. For now. Because in the Gilded Age, flowers weren't just decorative. They were power, and if someone's daffodils upstage yours next spring, well, you've already commissioned a floral sundial shaped like vengeance. For the rich in the Roaring Twenties, security meant more than a lock on the door. It meant uniformed guards, alarm systems as subtle as a marching band, and a staff trained to intercept not burglars, but over-enthusiastic cousins hoping for a small loan. Nothing gets you out of bed faster than the news that Aunt Maud is hiding in the dumbwaiter again. Your estate doesn't just have locks, it has protocols. There's a gatehouse at the end of a winding, tree-lined drive, staffed by a former military man who salutes every squirrel. Guests are vetted, listed, confirmed, cross-referenced, and, if suspiciously cheerful, politely redirected to a tea shop several miles away. Guards patrol the property at night, wearing pristine uniforms and expressions that say, "I haven't slept since the Spanish-American War." They walk in choreographed loops, stopping only to tip their hats at statues or report suspicious peacock activity. One of them swears he saw your third cousin trying to scale the rose trellis with a forged invitation. Inside, the house is equipped with the cutting-edge technology of the day. This includes door buzzers, early alarm systems the size of washing machines, and levers that ring bells in distant wings of the mansion, often confusing the staff and summoning a maid to the conservatory when you meant the pantry. It's security by way of Rube Goldberg. The master key is stored in a locked box, inside a drawer, behind a velvet rope, under the watchful eye of a butler named Harold, who once disarmed a particularly persistent opera singer trying to drop by unannounced. Harold never blinks. He's not paid to blink. And then there's the staff, your true line of defense. Every maid is trained in discreet interception techniques. A housekeeper can spot a freeloading relative from 50 yards, based solely on the speed at which they compliment the drapes. The gardener once tackled a man who claimed to be part of the Tulip Trust Fund branch. He wasn't. Letters are screened. Packages are examined. Anyone who uses the phrase "old family friend" is immediately directed to the tennis courts, which are conveniently located just far enough away that no one can hear them demanding inheritance. The biggest threats aren't burglars. They're relations. Cousins you haven't seen in years, who suddenly appear around the holidays with vague business ventures. Uncles with pocket watches and suspiciously timed financial emergencies. Aunts who arrive with homemade jam and leave with an entire silver tea set. Which brings us to the dumbwaiter, a small elevator for food and increasingly unwelcome family members. Aunt Maud has made a habit of hiding in it, hoping to overhear estate planning details or ride it straight to the silver drawer. Last time, she got stuck for 6 hours with a bottle of sherry and a copy of Lady's Home Journal. She described it as a meditative experience. Some families install motion sensors. Others hire illusionists to fake renovations when certain relatives approach. One particularly paranoid heiress commissioned a moat, not for defense, but to ruin anyone's shoes before they made it to the drawing room. And let's not forget the dogs. Not just any dogs, purebred, velvet-collared, security-certified canines who can differentiate between a respected investor and a second cousin with a gambling habit. They're gentle with guests, but start growling if someone mentions bridge loan in casual conversation. You sleep soundly at night, knowing that your estate is a fortress, guarded, alarmed, and emotionally walled off from anyone who once borrowed money for a sure thing in button manufacturing. Because in the 1920s, household security wasn't about fear. It was about boundaries. Especially the kind that wear top hats, carry forged calling cards, and swear they're just here for tea. No mansion is complete without a vast, underused library. Whether you read or not is irrelevant. The goal is to have enough first editions to make guests feel undereducated. Bonus points if you can name-drop Tolstoy, even though your last attempt to read War and Peace ended in a nap on page 4. And yes, your personal librarian absolutely judges your taste in romance novels. The library is not a room. It's a performance. You enter it the way lesser people enter churches. Quietly, respectfully, while trying not to sneeze. The scent of old paper, polished mahogany, and vague pretension hangs in the air like expensive cologne. Light filters in through stained glass windows that serve no purpose except to bathe your unread Dickens collection in holy light. Shelves stretch to the ceiling, which is at least 2 stories higher than necessary. You need a ladder to reach most of your books, but you haven't climbed it in years, not since you realized it wobbles, and your balance depends heavily on how many lunchtime martinis you've had. You own copies of everything. Homer in Greek, Shakespeare in leather, and 3 versions of the Bible, just in case one is the deluxe annotated gossip edition. Most of the spines have never been cracked. But that's not the point. This is intellectual taxidermy. You're not here to read, you're here to curate. A fireplace anchors the room. Above it hangs a portrait of you looking faintly thoughtful, as if pondering the subtle moral dilemmas in the brothers Karamazov. Instead of trying to remember where you last left your monocle, the armchairs are upholstered in something called Oxbridge crimson, which is mostly just red velvet with ambition. A globe sits nearby for the sole purpose of dramatically spinning it when you're feeling mysterious. You host occasional literary salons, an elegant phrase meaning wine-fueled debates about books no one finished. Guests quote philosophers they once skimmed in boarding school. You nod solemnly and throw in the occasional, "Ah, yes, Kierkegaard," while quietly wondering if that's the one with the existential dread or the tragic mustache. Your librarian is a man named Horace, who wears tweed in July and sighs a lot. He knows which books are real, which are just bindings over boxes of matches, and which ones you secretly borrowed from your cousin in 1914 and never returned. Horace maintains the Dewey Decimal System like it's sacred scripture and leaves passive-aggressive notes when you misfile anything under memoir that was clearly delusional fiction. Despite appearances, you do read, occasionally, mostly the scandalous romance series hidden behind the encyclopedias, the kind with titles like The Duke's Dangerous Dilemma or Satin Sin at Sunset. You read them with a brandy in hand, one eyebrow raised, and a blanket that cost more than a bicycle. There's a secret compartment in one shelf, not because it hides anything illicit, but because every wealthy library must include something secret. In your case, it conceals emergency truffles and a tiny bottle of gin, which you refer to as your philosopher's toolkit. Visitors are encouraged to peruse the shelves, just not touch anything. If they attempt to open a book, a silent alarm goes off in Horace's mind, and he materializes behind them with a look that can curdle milk. You explain that many of the books are fragile antiques and absolutely not held together by decorative tape. Because in the gilded world of the elite, a library isn't a place to learn, it's a stage, a flex, a velvet-lined sanctuary where your intelligence is measured in shelf length, your wisdom in volume count, and your self-worth by how confidently you mispronounce Nietzsche. And if anyone asks what your favorite book is, you smile faintly, gaze toward the middle distance, and whisper whichever one has the fewest pages. If it involves white pants and no actual sweating, it's probably a rich person's sport. You spend your days perfecting a golf swing that frightens birds, racing yachts that cost more than most neighborhoods, and inventing new games no one else understands, like synchronized inheritance, where everyone pretends not to care about Grandpa's will. Exercise, as a concept, is too proletarian. You prefer activities, golf, for instance, a leisurely stroll interrupted by occasional violence towards small white balls. You don't carry your own clubs. Don't be absurd. You have a caddy, a coach, and a valet who specializes in linen wrinkling prevention. Your swing is inconsistent. Your aim is questionable, but your outfit? Impeccable. A cashmere vest, tailored slacks, and shoes so white they could host a tea party. The course itself is less of a sports field and more of a curated landscape. Rolling hills, imported sand traps, and a pond with decorative swans who get startled every time you overshoot. The ninth hole has a champagne station. Not a water cooler, champagne. Water is for peasants and plants. And then there's yachting. Not sailing. Yachting, which is sailing's older, richer, lazier cousin. The yacht isn't for speed or utility, it's a floating drawing room with sails. You race, technically, but it's mostly an excuse to be seen standing on teak decks in a captain's hat you've never earned. A crew handles the actual boat parts while you sip brandy and pretend to care about wind direction. You once hosted a regatta purely out of spite. Your rival had just bought a new boat, so you organized an entire coastal showdown just to prove that yours had better wood polish. The judges didn't even know the rules. That was fine. The winner was whoever had the best hors d'oeuvres at sea. Tennis is also popular, but mostly for the aesthetics. White skirts, smooth lawns, polite applause. It's less about winning and more about not sweating. You always play doubles, so there's someone else to blame. The racket is monogrammed. The tennis balls are fresh, and your opponent is usually a viscount's daughter who claims she played a little at Oxford while casually destroying you in 5 straight sets. Then there are the invented games. You and your friends once created a sport called estate croquet. The rules were unclear, the mallets were antique, and the playing field spanned 3 acres and a hedge maze. No one actually won, but a minor baron was disqualified for tampering with the lawn. The most competitive sport of all is never played outside. It's synchronized inheritance. Here's how it works. A wealthy elder nears the end of their dynasty, and suddenly every heir becomes suspiciously available. Weekend visits multiply. Just dropping by becomes a family tradition. You all insist you're not interested in the will, that it's about spending time together while wearing suits tailored for maximum sympathy. Conversations are coded. Compliments are weaponized. One cousin bakes cookies. Another installs a new roof just because. Meanwhile, you reread the last version of the estate documents like it's the Magna Carta, noting with increasing panic that your name might be spelled slightly wrong. Again, no one admits it's a competition. That would be vulgar. But when Grandpa smiles at your cousin's souffle, you grip your wine glass a little tighter. Synchronized inheritance is all about timing, grace, and pretending not to check the codicil while pretending not to care. Because in the world of the fabulously wealthy, even leisure is strategic. Sports aren't about fitness, they're about flair. And the only real rule? Never let them see you sweat, especially if you're wearing white. So here we are, drifting quietly at the edge of the roaring 20s, your silk pajamas still pressed, the echoes of jazz and laughter fading as the mansion grows silent. You've spent your imaginary day being waited on hand and foot, feasting and flaunting, gossiping about garden parties, and fretting over the correct number of forks at dinner. Maybe you've wrestled a peacock or two, lost your way in the library, and pondered why anyone needs a bathroom with its own chandelier. And yet, beneath the sparkle and excess, you've felt it. The constant hum of anxiety, the desperate need to impress, the pressure to stay at the top. For every gilded hallway, there's a draft. For every mountain of caviar, a looming shadow on the horizon. The Great Depression is coming, and not even the best-dressed butler can sweep that under the rug. But here's the thing about history. No matter how ridiculous, privileged, or downright bonkers people's lives get, they're still just people, hoping, hustling, making terrible investment decisions, and, occasionally, remembering to be kind. Some survived, some stumbled, and some finally learned that happiness isn't measured in gold-plated toilet handles. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into a bed that is, mercifully, yours, and as you listen